Welcome in, everybody. You are listening to the Authority Podcast here on the B Podcast Network. Thanks, as always, for being with us. Thanks for joining us for what's going to be another great conversation. Casey, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, excited to have a conversation about clarity. It's always what I love to talk about.
Yes, we're going to attempt to have a very clear conversation here after a long day that I'm sure we've both had, and we'll really challenge ourselves. If we're able to do it, then we're pretty good at this, right? I wanted to start at the beginning of the book, the introduction, which you titled Not Another Unrealistic Book of Complicated Ideas, which I love as an introduction. I often bring some version of that concept into interviews here at some point, as I call it introducing the friction to the conversation. And if everything is just, here's what to do, this is the great practice, do this, it's like too smooth, right? It seems too easy. And as you're listening, you're kind of nodding along and it all sounds good. And then at the end, you may realize we didn't really talk about what makes this hard and what
Yeah.
why everybody doesn't do this if it sounded good, right?
Mhm.
And so I love the
Mhm.
fact that you started the book with that. And so I would love you to talk through that, the introduction, the things that you had in mind, and what you address in that piece in
Yeah.
setting the book up as something that is doable.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Clarity is this thing we talk about all the time, right? We want to have clarity. People are eager to gain clarity. Like you hear it in conversations here and there. You either hear it before when people are frustrated, like, I just need clarity around whatever it might be, or it could be after the fact when they've gained clarity and they're like, okay, I finally have clarity around this. And so it's just really an interesting concept in any organization, but I think specifically for schools and nonprofits, when people are trying to gain clarity, so often we think of it as just verbal communication, right? And there's a fallacy in that because it's so much more than just verbal communication. And when I start thinking about the complexity of this idea of clarity, and it's something we talk about and we know we want it, and when we have it, we know we've got it. But how did we get it? Like, what is the process? Can we put a system to that? And so that's really what my thought process was in the beginning of writing the book. And that introduction is, how do we take this very complex idea and simplify it so it's doable? And how can I give people something that is not this high theory, like it's so beyond what's realistic that we're not able to accomplish anything. And so, yeah, I get a couple of ideas and then I set the book down and move on. Instead, I wanted this book to be something that is more of habits that you are building in order to be a clarity driven leader. And so, yeah, that's enter the clarity cycle framework. It is a system for gaining clarity for yourself as a leader, but also creating clarity for your people.
Yeah. And another piece that you write about in that the introduction is where some of the challenge comes in is the misaligned perspective between teachers and leaders, the sometimes reality of living in different worlds. And you write
Yeah.
about moving between those worlds and seeing where those things are happening. And so I would love for you to speak to that a little
Hmm.
bit, because that's an important context for this too, for us to be thinking about as we're going through what are the steps, what are the goals here, who's
Yeah.
involved, what's the starting point, I guess, often, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
For initiatives, for a leader decides, okay, these are the things I want to do, and they have a great ideas, right? Great practices, but until you're in the mindset of my people starting from, right? Am I launching into this thing and I'm just almost dropped into the middle of the story, right? And they weren't thinking about this at all. It might be
Yeah.
a great idea that I'm super excited about, but everybody's looking at me like, what's happening? Vice versa, right? So I would love to have you speak to that.
Yeah, that's really where this stemmed from is, man, I've lived so much of my work in education in this, what I call in the book, this intermentium, right? Like you're getting to see two different perspectives as though an author has written a book and they're going from one perspective to another. And that's what I feel like that's the world that I lived in for most of my career, even as a teacher, because I became a teacher leader pretty quickly. And so I kind of served as this in between person between classroom teacher and administrators. Well, time and time again, what I'm noticing is we have leaders who are consistently saying, man, we're trying to get people on board, but no one will commit. We can't get our people on board. They're resistant. We've said the expectations time and time again, and still we're seeing the same problems. But then on the opposite end of that, I'm hearing from their teachers who are saying, we have no idea what's going on, or we don't know what the expectations are. They told us to do this, but we don't know really what that looks like. What do they mean when they say that? And so there's just this gap between the adults on the campus. And in the book, like the subtitle of the book says 6 steps to bridge gaps. And those gaps, really what I'm talking about is the gaps among the adults on campus, because if we can't bridge the gaps between the
Mm.
adults, it's going to make it really difficult to bridge the gaps in student learning. And so I talk a lot about really taking clarity from this idea of just a communication tool to how do we put clarity into action and put action to it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that dynamic that you just described is foundational to everything that happens in the school, from implementation and usage of a particular tool or program, right? To, of course, how we cultivate school culture and climate and all of those elements, the work environment for faculty and staff. All of those pieces start with that the alignment between the adults and the ability to have it or not. Are our purchasing decisions aligned with our understanding of what works, doesn't, what we can do? Do we have clarity on what our practices look like, and are they contextualized within the realities of what happens here, right? Because
Right.
it can be very straightforward. Okay, all you have to do is this and this, but when does that happen during the day? Sometimes it's, oh, this is really simple. You can do it in 30 minutes a day or whatever. I'm like, okay, which 30 minutes? There's a lot happening here, right?
Yeah.
And then nobody benefits. Certainly students don't benefit. The adults don't benefit. Everybody's frustrated by that. And you write as well that clarity is kindness, which I think you have a better understanding of that concept once you have been in an environment where clarity is achieved and you have had to live through the discomfort that
Mm,
creates at the beginning, right? The discomfort in being the person who is providing the clarity, discomfort in receiving it a lot of times,
yeah.
whether that's
Yeah.
feedback, an evaluation of how something went, did it went, and sometimes it's going to be, this wasn't good, and here's why,
Hmm.
or this didn't work, here's where we stand, right? But when you know what that is, you're so much more informed. You
Hmm.
can come up with a better strategy for what you want to do next time. You can think, then you're not having to guess what's happening
Right.
around me. Like sometimes we almost want to be in that ambiguity because we don't have to confront the black and white reality of what the
Right.
problems are. And yet,
Yeah.
once you are able to step into the development of clarity, you understand that it is the it's the kinder option. But
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So I want to address that actually, because what you're talking about sounds like, so I think we often prefer to live in this state of ambiguity because it's what we know. And I write about that in the book as being like a quiet chaos on your campus. So a lot of schools experience a quiet chaos, and it's not like this visible outright thing we see, but instead it's just kind of living under the surface, and we don't know any different because we haven't experienced any different. And when you start to develop a clarity culture, you're going to notice a difference. That ambiguity and that quiet chaos is going to be unveiled. And that's exactly what you're talking about. That's going to be uncomfortable, but it's so much more kind to be clear. So that's the second thing I want to address is we hear Brene Brown has coined the phrase clear is kind. And I think it's so familiar to people, but we equate it to just verbal communication. And we also tend to equate it to discomfort and uncomfortable conversations. Like we equate clear is kind to having the hard conversations, the fierce conversations. But if you read on in what Brene Brown says, she says, clear is kind, yes, but that also means that we have to paint done. And so essentially in the book, I'm teaching people about how to paint done. And it reminds me so much, there are two different definitions in the dictionary for clarity that I want to read really quickly because there's a very big difference between the two of them. The first one is the quality of being easily understood. And I think when we hear the term clarity or when we're trying to provide clarity, we're trying to get people to understand us. The problem is if you stop at the verbal level of communication, people aren't going to understand in a way that impacts their work and impacts their capacity because I may be communicating the expectations again and again, but my perception of the expectations could be very different than the perceptions of someone else's, like someone else's perceptions of the expectations. So we've got to take it a step further. And I love this second definition, and this is what my book serves to do. It is the state of having a full, detailed, and orderly mental grasp of something, which is so much more detailed than the first definition. And so in
Mhm.
my mind, it's like
Right.
we're putting clarity into action. So, yeah, we want to communicate, but let's take it a step further and let's paint done for our people and give them an orderly mental grasp of what we're trying to get them to get on board with.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it's rooted in the empathy of it, right? I mean, it's clarity is contingent upon the receiver of that message, that
Yeah.
action, behavior, right? And so it
Yeah.
requires taking a step to think, okay, like sometimes it's a little more preparation, organization, as you said, the pre-work to say, okay, how can I organize this, communicate it, piece it together, whatever it is, in a way that will be clear to the person who's reading it. And putting myself outside of my own head, who might
Hmm.
understand it fairly well inside and out, and like I can start at any point in the story and start to just rattle off ideas, and I'm thinking, oh, this is very clear. And then the person
Right.
I'm talking to is completely lost, and not always easy to do. And I certainly can catch myself doing that and thinking, I don't, is this making any sense? Right? Like,
Yeah. Right.
is anybody following along
Yeah.
here? And I think it's a lot more than it's, everybody will have a different way of doing this. And when people are authentic in what they say about how to engage and their willingness to answer questions, say, or to repeat things or to present in a different way, that's good. But I think it's not always sufficient because it can shift the burden of that to the receiver to
Hmm.
basically say, let me know if this isn't clear. Ask a question. And it's like, of course
Yeah.
it's not clear, right? So you're going to ask a million questions to get to it. And then you're uncomfortable because you're thinking, oh, I feel like I'm not getting any of this. But if I
Uh-huh.
ask, start again from the beginning, then it seems like there's something wrong with me, right?
Yeah. Right.
And yeah, so
Yeah.
it really requires some reflection and thought to say, to the best of my knowledge, how can I be clear about this? How can I be concise?
Hmm.
Right? What was it?
Yeah.
Sorry, I have
Concise is the
to
other
write
piece
so
of
long.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't really talk about that too much in the book. I mean, there are pieces of it where I'm talking about being concise in specifically like what is it that you're focusing on? How are we communicating that concisely? But man, what an important thing to think about too is which kind of adds to that piece of clarity doesn't always mean that we're communicating verbally because I can talk for 30 minutes and still not be clear. You think about those people who go on and on, and we're just, the more we continue to talk, the more we're muddying the waters. So, yeah, that
Well,
being
it's like a
concise is so important too.
where's Waldo or
Yeah.
something. Like the picture of
Yeah.
Waldo is clearly drawn, but I have no idea where it is in
Uh
this
huh.
mix of everything else. It's not clear to me. And so
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
okay. How do I, like, what is the main point here? How do
Uh
I
huh.
prioritize that and get on the same page? You you say that clarity precedes capacity. So going into some of the other elements here of the book, and would like to talk about that piece and what that means for leaders, how they can start creating that clarity and then
Yeah.
developing the means for capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the book, I do talk about the phrase I use a lot is clarity precedes capacity. And the idea is exactly that. We have to not only gain clarity for ourselves, but create clarity for our people in order for them to build the capacity to support student learning or whatever it is that our goals are that we're working toward. And so the way that I address building clarity in the book in a way that builds the capacity of your people is by going through a 6-step framework, which is called the clarity cycle framework. And when I'm teaching about this in the book, really what we're looking at is yes, these are 6 steps that you're going through, but essentially, we want these 6 things that you're going through to be habits that you're building. Clarity building habits of a clarity
Mhm.
driven leader. And so I'm just going to talk about really quickly the 6 different steps that you might go through and how they should form as habits as you're going
Okay.
through them. But the first is deciding what is your area of focus. Like, we've got to decide what is the essential one thing that we're focused on. When you decide your area of focus, we then go into the second step of the clarity cycle framework, which is analyzing the area of focus to determine goals. So you should, as a leader, that thinking about the area of focus, that first step, really the habit you're building is trying to decide what is essential. I've got to get into the habit of figuring out what is essential. That's going to carry through all areas of leadership for you. What's essential? That second step, analyzing that area of focus to determine goals, we are deciding if this is our area of focus, then what are the couple of goals that are going to help us to target that or reach that area of focus? And then the third step is gaining insight from people. And this is missed so often. But so we notice so often how leaders will have this area of focus. This is what I know we need to focus on. Here are our goals. Then they start pushing it out and communicating it to their people. But what we're missing is gaining insight. The third step, gaining insight, is another habit we have to build. How are you continually reaching out to your people and listening to what they have to say about this area of focus and these goals? Because if you can gain insight, then you can go into step 4, which is casting vision and scripting critical moves. I've got to know what's going on in the minds of my people before I can start to cast vision about where we're headed and before I can tell them all of the small steps we're going to take to get there. Because whatever they say when I'm gaining insight, that's going to inform our path because I've got to decide what are the strengths I'm going to leverage and what are the areas where we need to pay close attention to help them move forward instead of feeling stuck or moving backwards. And then the fifth step is another big one that we miss. That's celebrating systematically and providing feedback regularly. So that celebration, we see it so often at a surface level, or we're celebrating things that seem a little bit removed from what our goals are. But if we're celebrating systematically, our celebrations are directly correlated to our area of focus and our goals. And so is our feedback. Our feedback is so intentional. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard instructional leaders say, I just don't know exactly what to provide feedback on when I go in. So their feedback is really almost random, right? But if we're going through the clarity cycle framework, then our feedback is really intentional and targeted. We're providing feedback by design. And again, that becomes a habit of celebrating systematically, providing feedback regularly. And the last step is calibrating to sustain progress because how often do we see schools that are trying to implement an initiative or trying to reach these set of goals and it becomes a really neat poster on the wall or we've stated it in like in service and then nobody hears about it again, you know? And so we start to see those cyclical problems occurring. And so that last step is just really in a very formulaic way trying to decide how do we calibrate and sustain this progress so we don't lose momentum. So that's in a nutshell the whole clarity cycle framework.
Even in your description there, you may have indicated, why you say like strategy is simple, clarity is complex, right? Because there are these steps. And also, as you pointed to, like, in the name clarity cycle framework, that cycle means something in particular, right? This doesn't just happen one time.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it doesn't happen one time, but the other thing too is I could go back into any piece of this cycle at any point. So I might get through the third step, which is gaining insight, and I'm starting to cast vision and script critical moves. But you know what? I'm probably going to be gaining insight from my people, from stakeholders again and again throughout the entire year. So this is absolutely not a one and done. You are continually doing this work. In fact, I have been working with a school in Los Angeles. They started the Clarity Cycle framework last year, went through the Clarity Cycle framework, and they have started this new school year with kind of reflecting on their progress from last year. And they're going through the Clarity Cycle framework again to get really clear about their new goals or just the shift in the goals that they set from last year. So it's really beautiful to see that continuation and to know that the people that are working there have that consistency to lean into so they can place their attention and focus on what is the real work that we need to do, because I'm not guessing at the direction that we're headed or how we're going to get there or how I'm a contributing member of this organization.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that chapter is about gaining insight because that's a great word that connotes that clarity is in there, right? I mean, I've been talking about this recently, like provide insight, not information. Right? The difference being
Yes.
like you need to identify what is the piece of this that is relevant, interesting, compelling, motivating to my audience here and pull that out and spotlight it and not just do an information dump of all the stuff that is not sure this is all it's valid the information is there's good data behind it or it's based on a lot of expertise and yet it's a lot of filtering. It's not service oriented, right? And
Yeah.
that way going back to the empathy piece that I'm not really helping you if I'm saying like dropping a book on your desk and saying, "Here, read this,"
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus saying, "Let me tell you about the key idea, and then if you find that really helps you, then you might want to learn more or something." But what's the
Yeah.
insight?
Yeah.
So there's there's so much more to dive into across, I think, the cycle here. But I think one place to maybe home in on a little bit is the collaboration required at each step across the process and like
Hmm.
probably the revisiting of the importance of that. How's it working? Are we remembering to commit to collaborating? One, collaboration versus not collaboration versus like
Uh-huh.
we collaborated at step one and now we're just going to keep moving. But also, you say about a lot of teams that they think they're collaborating, but they're just coordinating. And
Uh-huh.
what's the difference there? But would love to hear about that in this context of what is the difference between coordination and collaboration. What does collaboration actually look like? But how is it sustained throughout the cycles
Yeah.
when I'm sure it's like, it takes intentionality.
Oh my gosh, it so does. And that's another piece of this. We can't, and I will say sometimes, and it depends on who, it depends on the leader that it is, but sometimes with just like with a lot of things, like we want the magic bullet, right? Like we want the quick fix. And so we go through the steps, but we go through them superficially. And I will never advocate for anyone to go through anything superficially, but definitely not something like the clarity cycle. Because you do, if you go through it superficially, and if you try to go at it on your own as an individual leader, you are not going to make the progress that you're hoping for. You're not going to see the changes that you're hoping for. In the book, just a little bit, I'm writing another book that really talks about clarity of three different things, but one of those things is clarity of collaboration. And I talk about the difference between authentic collaboration and faux collaboration, which is to say fake collaboration, because we have this idea for whatever reason that where two or more people are gathered, collaboration is happening. Well, you and I both know that's not actually the case. And I can't tell you how many times I'm meeting with instructional leadership teams or I'm meeting with teacher teams. And when I say, tell me about the collaboration on your team, they say things like, we collaborate really well. Like, or, and then I'll continue to say, okay, well, tell me what you mean by that. Like, what do you mean you collaborate really well? And so they go on to say, well, we get along really well, we share resources, and that's pretty much where it ends. Like, we get along, we share resources. But that is not collaboration. That is just co-working. That's coordinating. That's I'm getting along in
Yeah.
order to share resources, but then we go back to our own spaces and we continue in our default state, which is to say we're not making any changes that are moving the needle of our organization. So when you're going through the clarity cycle framework, we have to start at the beginning. I start with the instructional leadership team really getting clear on what are the norms that we're setting for, like, what is it that we're really wanting to do? What is our purpose and goals here? And then if this is our focus, then what are the norms we're going to set and how does each team member contribute so that our norms are being adhered to and so that we don't lose momentum as we go through this. And it is challenging going throughout the school year. We can be pulled in a million different directions. It can be easy to kind of let go of things or let a meeting slide. Like, well, we just didn't really have time. It's okay. We don't have to meet. We'll just kind of talk about it in passing. No, we have to have intentional touch points where we're having the hard conversations or celebrating the great things. Those things have to happen, and we have to make those the essential things and make it a priority. Because if we're not prioritizing that, then guess what we are prioritizing? We're prioritizing the chaos that's going to continue if we don't
Mhm.
prioritize the other things. So, yeah, I there's so much I could say about collaboration. Listen, that's another podcast episode, but it can be so challenging for people to move into authentic collaboration if they've only ever experienced faux collaboration. And
Mhm.
most people have only ever experienced faux collaboration, unfortunately.
Yeah, right. And you said contribute there, which I think is a key term. It's moving from like co-work to co-create. It's a
Yeah.
much more proactive. It is all parties or whichever parties are involved really contributing to what the plan is, what does it look like, what's the strategy, how are we doing it, why are we doing it, and then being in alignment, but not just you know, getting aligned within whatever lines are already drawn and saying, okay, well, you take this spot and I'll take that one. And we're not butting up against
Yes.
each other and we're all kind of, it's less fulfilling. It's a lot, it's an opportunity cost. Like, what ideas are we missing? How could we be making this place better? How can we be uniquely benefiting from the ideas, insights, and talents of those in this community, right? To make
Mm-hmm.
it thrive and alive. And again, like going back to the discomfort piece, people on both sides of collaboration, if they have only experienced that faux collaboration, are may feel some initial discomfort because you have to be willing to put yourself out there in some ways, not just like go along to get along, but to say, okay, here's really what I think, and let me give you the benefit of my expertise and my experience and share that as the
Yeah.
other people. Like a lot of people will say they want to be collaborative, but they don't like really open
Yeah.
themselves up to hearing what other people think, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's just missing the mark on what's possible, right? That it's not just about achieving harmony necessarily, but
Yes.
amplifying that.
Yeah. Right. And once people experience that, like if you once you experience true collaboration where your working geniuses are alive and well, you're thriving and your team is thriving, like individually you're thriving and your team is thriving, you don't want to go back. You don't want to go backwards. Like you want more of that. And those are the kinds of teams and environments that we're trying to create. And I will continuously say there's no creating that if we don't know how to gain clarity and create clarity for people.
Yeah. What happens when you have a team that is maybe not doing this very well. They're stuck in their silos. They are cycling through dysfunction. How does the leader like make a move to break out of that? Figure out how to start turning things around.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I'm going to go into clarity cycle framework because, and this is a great thing about this framework in that it is habits that you're building, because I
Mhm.
will always be a proponent of if you're noticing that, you have to get in front of people and hear what they have to say. And you've got to gain that insight to figure out where is it that this dysfunction is truly coming from. Because it's sometimes as leaders, we have this eagle eye view of our organization, and we can get caught in we can get caught in the clouds, I think. And our teachers and staff can get caught in the weeds. They're zoomed in. And so we've got to be able to gain perspective from both parties, or from both, well, I guess perspectives is the right word to use there, but I've got to be able to meet in the middle to see what is it that they're seeing that I'm not, what is it I'm seeing that they are not able to see, and how do we bridge that gap? So the only way to do that is to have the conversations. But here's the thing about that. So often leaders want to have the conversations, but when they start listening, and I talk about this a lot in the Gaining Insight chapter, when they start talking or having those conversations, instead of listening to understand, they're listening in order to justify, or they're listening to respond. And
Mhm.
we can only sit in the space of listening to understand if you're wanting to get out of dysfunction.
Yeah. Yeah, as anybody who's ever hosted a podcast can say, right? And then it's not that easy to get out of listening to respond because you're like, all right, thinking ahead of what are the other things I want to talk about, right? And you're realizing
Yep.
at a certain point, oh, wait, what are we talking about here? What did I
Mm-hmm.
miss? And but it's the same thing here that it can be well intentioned. I have this vision in mind for these things we want to do, and I'm really excited to be able to move us to the next step. And but like it just takes
Yeah.
time because
Yeah.
everybody's you're bringing them along from wherever their starting point is. They need to ask their questions, get the micro clarifications within the big
Mm-hmm.
clarification and clarity, and be ready to go step by step, and that it's not just about willingness or buy-in, so to speak, but it's about
Yeah.
legitimately being ready to achieve the next step and getting there, right?
Yeah.
And not dissimilar from concepts within instruction and intervention and all these things that are
Right.
right. Like if I'm missing some key component skill here for what we need to do next week. Now I'm like remaining behind, or I'm continuing to have gaps, and
Yeah.
that'll compound week by week, and there's always going to be something missing in my understanding, and eventually that's like there's a crack
Yeah.
and everything's not fitting together because there's
Mm-hmm.
something, and it just would require some patience in this case, some ability to be able to reinforce. But yeah, that
Yeah.
all tracks back to seeing past our own enthusiasm.
Yeah,
And
100%. Yeah. So when I take people through, like, usually there are a couple of ways people can partner with me to learn about and go through the training for the clarity cycle framework, but the most appropriate way or impactful way to go through it is to go through a 2-day training. So we spend one day just learning about the clarity cycle framework. We put together some plans, some action plans. And then the second day is really important too, because it's all about the like what ifs. So we learn how to have the hard conversations, or what's going to happen if, my people start to push back or there's resistance. So yeah, it does take time and effort, but any great thing is going to take time and effort if you're willing to put forth the time and effort.
yeah, well, how do you sustain that as the
Yeah.
leader when it's not working? And
uh
I when you are not seeing evidence of results, how do
mhm.
you keep yourself from reverting to an easier approach, or to, I guess, just one way accountability in a
Yeah.
sense. You know what? I'm just going to say what I want, and you're accountable for understanding it and doing it. And if not, well, I did my part. And that's
Mhm.
tempting. That's tempting. And it can be felt to be straightforward, right? I was clear about what I wanted. I didn't there it wasn't ambiguous in the sense of I didn't mince words, I didn't
Yeah.
hedge, I didn't hold back, but it may have been ambiguous as far as what's the real the why, what's the motivation, what's the
Mhm.
like how to make this happen. And
Yeah, there are a couple of things I think I can say about that. First, and they're going to sound really like opposite things, and they actually are opposite things. But first, we have to be so self-reflective, which is so interesting we're bringing this up because that's also a part of the second book is clarity of identity as a leader. So we have to, for ourselves, have emotional clarity, social clarity, and goal clarity in order to be a reflective leader. And so constantly self-reflecting and just considering like what is it? Where have I potentially been ambiguous? And why? Like, are we getting down to the root cause of why people just were not making progress with this? But also, if you're noticing such struggles, then I'm wondering if you're going at this as a lone rider instead of with a solid team of people. And when I talk about instructional leadership teams going through the clarity cycle work, a lot of the times it ends up being like campus administration, but then also a couple of classroom lead teachers. And that's important too. But here's the opposite end of that I'm going to say. Sometimes you're going to find yourself in just not the right place for you. So I have been in the position where I have tried desperately to put things into action and implemented what I felt like was best practice. And you know what? The school that I in was just not a good fit for me. And so I had to make the hard decision about where am I going to go so that I am feeling that I contribute and I feel empowered, but I'm also empowering the people that I'm working with. I'm not saying that's the case a lot of the time, but it can happen. So one of the two things have to happen. You have to either be really self-reflective and decide where is it that we're kind of misaligned here, or I have to decide is this the best fit for me where I am in my career?
yeah, absolutely. So last question here is, what are some indicators that it is working? And what would you look at and see, okay, we're making progress here, this
Yeah.
thing is improved, or these are some of the key look for?
The number one look for is, and I ask people this when I start working with them in the clarity cycle framework, I say, if I was to walk your halls and go up to any person and say, tell me about what your area of focus and goals are, if they can tell me they're all using a similar common language, then you're golden. And
Yeah.
that's what we want by the end of the clarity cycle framework. We know it's working when people are all starting to speak the same language, and you're going to hear it in meetings like, hey, this is our area of focus and goals. So for this meeting, it means that we need to focus on these things, or this is essential to talk about. And so that's where you're going to know you're making progress is when people are speaking the same language and you're seeing it consistently show up in different pockets across your campus.
Awesome. Well, Casey, I referenced at the beginning of the show that you also have a podcast, Catching Up with Casey. And of course, you have the book, you have other work you do. Tell our listeners about your podcast, tell them about other resources or things they can check out.
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast, the Catching Up with Casey show, is a place where we talk about the seemingly small things in leadership that make the biggest impact. So we're gaining clarity around those very small things that make a big impact. And then on the website, you can find out about everything that I do as a speaker and consultant with schools and other organizations. Again, that is catchingupwithcasey.com. And you can find me on socials. Catch up with Casey. That's where I am. Just imagine you're catching up with me over a cup of coffee.
Excellent. Well, listeners, will put all those links below in the show notes so you can check out the book, wherever you get your books. It's The Craft of Clarity, so that you can check out the podcast, connect on social media, all of the above. Put those links below so you can check those out. Please also, if you have not already, we really appreciate those ratings and reviews on Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen. They're really beneficial to helping new listeners learn about the show and know what you like about the show. So please do that. Casey, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.